Hello, everyone, and welcome to another session of Power in Her Words Domain. Today we have Sheeba with us. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us.
I'm delighted to be here. Thank you.
So let's get right into it. You've spent nearly 2 decades in user experience. You founded Code for Pakistan and Tech for Change, and now you're leading UX and innovation at the US Census Bureau. So that's one hell of a journey, right? You've achieved so much in all these years, and we're very excited to hear about your journey, about your learnings. Particularly, let's start with how your journey and your career has shaped the way that you see design and technology and in the context of social change.
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. It's been an eventful journey, and it's one that has shaped my belief that design and technology are really powerful tools for social change, um, but only when they're grounded in three things: empathy, equity, and community. And so I started my career in Silicon Valley building products that were used by millions of people. Those experiences taught me the rigor of product thinking, which is, rapidly prototyping and moving fast and solving problems at scale and being an advocate for the user, and designing with clarity and intention. But one of the most important things I learned was the process of how solutions are created. I saw it often done poorly and but also done well. And that was really, really critical because you can apply that process to anything. We have a saying in civic tech, which is tech for public good, that it's never about the technology, right? Civic tech is really about following that human-centered design process. For example, if we want to help women in remote rural areas in the realm of mother's health, we would start by doing discovery research, spending time figuring out the domain of the problem and with them, and we would perhaps learn that they don't have access to smartphones. Well, then the solution would not be a smartphone application, right? It might be maybe they have basic Nokia phones, and so it might be SMS based, or maybe it's not technology based at all. Maybe it involves flyers that are on paper, or maybe they can't read, and then it involves people going door to door. All of that is still civic tech because the way we get to the right solution is this very specific human-centered process, right? And so when I started out in user experience, and I would say this is still true for the vast majority of the user experience world, which is that inclusion often means designing for different types of users, which is running usability tests, adding accessibility features at the end. But over the years, I've learned that real inclusion happens when you bring people with lived experiences into the process from the start as co-creators, not as subjects of research. So even the example that I gave you was actually an example where they were not co-creators, but they were subjects of research, right? So now when we think about human-centered design, which follows the design thinking process, it works well for many things, but solutions don't stick. Community solutions don't stick unless they're built with and by communities, not for them. And some of the most meaningful work that I've been part of happened in rooms where co-creating solutions, that reflected the lived experiences and the local context of the community members. Um, and I think I can't overemphasize the importance of having the right voices from the community. So, for example, it's really important to see who's being left out, right? The people that often, if we do, for example, like if you were to do a community workshop, you would get people coming in who have the time, who have the luxury to take off, a day's worth of work, who can be there and be present. But if you want true inclusion, then you have to go above and beyond to get that single mother who has children and is working two jobs and cannot afford to take off, a day's worth of wages. And how do you get her involved? And thinking through all of that, it might mean really going above and beyond and doing extra, ensuring bringing her and the kids and ensuring that there's babysitting and paying for the amount of time that she is taking off, making sure there's food, it's worth her while, and all of that sort of thing, right? So, um, across all these chapters, I'd say that one belief has stayed constant, which is that good design is fundamentally about belonging. Right? It's about ensuring that every person feels seen and heard and served by the systems around them. Technology can move really quickly, as we're seeing these days, but you know, discovery research with users takes longer, right? And which means that you might create an app overnight, but meaningful change requires patience, it requires humility, and it requires the courage to listen really deeply and throw out your preconceived ideas.
That's pretty interesting, especially the thing that you said about bringing in users as co-creators and not just subjects of research, right? Because that's when you're really able to put yourself in their shoes, understand their pain points, and then address them via solutions, right? And then there's another thing that you mentioned that you've also talked about before, which is that empathy is the foundation for innovation, right? And that's something that you mentioned right now as well, that that's part and parcel of civic tech. So, can you share an example where empathy drove a solution that you worked on, whether that was in your current role in the government or through Code for Pakistan or any of your other ventures?
Yeah, absolutely. So first off, what is empathy? Empathy means really understanding the people that you are trying to help. And that means standing in their shoes, really getting into understanding their hopes and dreams and aspirations and their behaviors and their daily routines and their needs and their goals. And that's really the first step and the foundation of the design thinking process, right? It all starts with that discovery research, spending time with the people you want to help and talking to them to really make sure you understand, especially their needs. So one example from Code for Pakistan is the Mustahiq application, which was developed by fellows in the Code for Pakistan Government Innovation Fellowship Program in partnership with the KP government, specifically the Social Welfare Department. And the department's initial idea was to create a digital platform where citizens could apply directly for different zakat welfare schemes. But when the fellows went into the field and they talked to the families who actually benefit from these programs, they discovered something that was really crucial, which is that most of the people eligible for zakat weren't very comfortable with technology or filling out online forms or English interfaces. And so that insight completely changed the direction of the project. And instead of building a complex application system that people couldn't easily use, the team focused on what would really help, which is clear, accessible information. And they designed a very simple informational app that had Urdu text and voiceover instructions in Urdu with large icons for the interface. And it simply listed all available zakat schemes, their application deadlines, and the contact numbers of local zakat officers by district so that citizens could reach out directly and apply in person, which is what they felt more comfortable with. And they could do that on time. So it sounds simple, but it had a big impact. And by meeting people where they are, not where we assumed they were, the department made it easier for thousands of families to accept support, that they were already entitled to. And I think that's what empathy in design looks like. It's not about flashy technology. It's not about coming up with new ideas, which we often, call innovation because we think that that's new and shiny. But it's about understanding people's realities and creating solutions that work for them wherever they are. And I think, I should also define the way I think about innovation. Innovation means changing the way something is done. And empathy pretty much always leads to better innovation.
That's pretty interesting. And you said that this is pretty simple, right? But it's often the simple things that we end up overlooking. And I mean, complicated apps in Pakistan overall, not just in the context of this particular app that you were talking about, um, are very, very it's a prevalent problem, right? Because people can't read in English. They can't really understand complex systems. So having big icons in, say, like a banking application would even be helpful. So not just in this particular context. Switching gears a little bit and talking about the different teams that you've led across different industries, right? You worked for nonprofits, startups, and now you're working in the US federal agency. So, how do the structure of these teams and how does innovation and the approach to work differ in structured environments like governments and then fast-paced environments like the private sector?
Yeah, that's such a good question. And honestly, like leading creative teams in government and in startups couldn't feel more different on the surface. But at the core, they're surprisingly similar because everything is human, right? And so in startups, you're moving fast, like you're iterating constantly, and the culture rewards risk taking. And in government, the pace is slower, the stakes are a lot higher. So, for example, compared to your online shopping not arriving on time, like if there's a house on fire and the fire engine doesn't get there on time, like your life is at stake, right? So the stakes are a lot higher. The systems are all built for accountability. They are not built for speed. They're built to make sure that there's inclusion, that it takes care of everybody, that there's accountability, that nothing is missed. So that's it's a very different way that the systems are built. But in both contexts, when you're leading a team, the magic happens when you create psychological safety, right? A space where people feel free to question, where they feel free to express new ideas or to experiment, to push, boundaries, to bring their full creativity to the table. And as a startup, that might look like testing a bold new feature like every week and at breakneck speed, right? But at the US Census Bureau, it might look like rethinking a 200-year-old process of how census data is displayed to people to make it easier for people to use, right? The creativity is the same. It's just operating within different constraints. So in government, you can't always move fast, but you absolutely can and should and do move with intention. And you learn to design small wins that build momentum. And you learn to translate visionary ideas into bite sized pieces that can have tremendous impact at scale because of the millions of people that are using government services. And so the difference isn't so much in the creativity itself, it's in how you lead it. Like as a leader in Silicon Valley companies, you have to manage the team's energy and motivation when priorities change top down, and people get disillusioned. And in government, it's very similar. You need to give your team the courage to be bold, even if the system is built for caution. So either way, the goal is the same. It's to make change feel possible. Right?
Right. And while the output and the way teams operate, of course, it differs industry to industry, and of course, in the context of whether it's the government sector or the private sector, it of course also depends on the person who's leading and their personal approach, right? So let's talk a little bit about your approach to leading creative teams. And you've said that you don't just design products, you design designers. So what does that mean in practice? And what is your approach to leading and to fostering creativity within your team?
Yeah, so what I mean by designing designers is that great products are a byproduct of great people and great teams of great people working together well. So people who feel empowered, they feel curious, they feel like they can experiment and they have the space to experiment, while they're also fully aware of the constraints at hand. And so, as a leader, my real design challenge isn't the interface or the service. I mean, that's part of it, but it's the environment that allows creativity to flourish and experimentation to flourish, right? And leadership to flourish. So in practice, that means creating a culture that where designers aren't just executing, but they think and they question and they lead and they come up with so much better, stuff than I could just on my own. So I try to give my teams clarity of purpose and vision, so that they know, why we're doing this and where we are headed, but like freedom of approach. So instead of telling them what to design, I help them explore, why something matters and who is it for. That's really important. So that shift, when they have that full understanding, that builds a lot of confidence, a lot of ownership, and better design instincts over time. And at Code for Pakistan, we run a women's civic digital internship program. And many of our women interns, came in fresh after school, or were juggling challenging situations such as they had become new mothers, or they were taking care of somebody elderly in the family, or other just mobility restrictions, like they're in Parda and that sort of thing. And so they were very talented, but unsure of their voice. And watching them grow into, confident innovators in the civic space who could walk into a government office and present their solutions and defend them, and their learnings confidently to government officials, like that memory, like that has been one of the most rewarding experiences of my career. And even as a teacher, like when I teach at San Diego City College, I see my role as nurturing that same sense of creativity and courage and curiosity, helping my students see themselves not just as designers, certainly not just as designers of systems or screens or services, but really as designers of experiences, and ultimately impact. And I should say systems are actually part of experiences. So I take that away a little bit. But really thinking about things end to end and holistically, and then that's real impact. Because when you design designers, when you invest in people's growth, and not just their output, you create a ripple effect, right? That goes far beyond anything that I could create, one single product or what have you. You're shaping the next generation of change makers, who will go on to impact just so much more themselves. Yeah.
That sounds very inspiring. So instead of just teaching them to look at apps in terms of just screens, but rather as systems that are connected and come together to provide an experience to the user. Um, that's something that they will take away and also apply to their future roles and also to whatever context that they're working within, right?
Right.
The next question I'm going to ask is something that you probably get asked a lot is how do you think AI is going to transform user experience and then civic technology? And how do you see that panning out in the next couple of years?
Yeah, so AI is definitely transforming the landscape very, very fast. Uh, Not just, and most people focus on, it's transforming how we design, but it's also transforming what we design and who gets included in that process. And that's really critical. In civic technology, I see AI as both a tremendous opportunity and a big responsibility. Because on the one hand, it can make public services, far more accessible and much faster. It can address needs much, much faster, solve problems, as we call it. Although I prefer calling it addressing needs because problems are rarely ever solved fully. But by personalizing experiences, by simplifying complex forms, by doing things iteratively, right? Like, for example, with a chat bot, it'll ask you something one by one rather than just putting you in front of this big table and you have to make sense of it, right? So it helps people find the information they need in their own language, in their own context, in their own way, in the way they think about things. I mean, just imagine someone in a rural village in Pakistan being able to talk to a government chatbot in Pashto or Sindhi and instantly get reliable, online, trusted, human-centered information in a language in a way that they understand. That's really, really powerful. But on the other hand, AI can just as easily reinforce inequities, like if we're not very, very intentional. So, for example, there can be real bias in the data, especially if the data is just mined from particular, sources, and there's already existing inequity in there, like what information is there online, right?
Yeah.
Or in the lack of transparency, or in exclusion of marginalized voices, again, because historically, if you're excluded, then there's less, base data on you, and then there's, that exclusion gets amplified. And so that can make technology and the provider of that technology, for example, government, feel even less trustworthy, right? And so I cannot overemphasize like the intentionality that needs to go into inclusion for this. And the role of design in this new era, to me, is to keep the human inclusive, human at the center, even much, much more. So to ensure AI augments empathy, not replaces it. At Code for Pakistan, we're exploring potential for AI to reduce barriers to civic participation, especially if it's co-created with communities and built on inclusive data. So I think that the future of UX in civic tech isn't just about designing with AI, it's about designing how AI shows up in people's lives, right? It's about making sure that intelligence, whether artificial or human, always serves dignity and equity and trust for all. Yeah.
I think it's even a greater responsibility when it comes to civic tech because, like you said, it's all about empathy, right? And that's something that will always need the human touch. That's not something that AI is going to be able to mimic anytime soon, at least. So it's very important to use it responsibly and make sure that that human touch is still there.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot of talk about, I don't know if you've heard the term synthetic users.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, but that too. So all of that, like the corpus of data that is being amplified, or is being genericized, because what AI does is it genericizes
Yeah.
a lot of things too, right? Like that is so important to really cross-check and make sure, against organic human users, and make sure that that is truly representing real human needs in an inclusive
Yeah.
way.
Yeah. So, many professions they want to use their skills, their design skills, their technology for social good, but they don't know how to do that. Especially in countries like Pakistan, most people haven't even heard about civic tech or using tech for social change. So, what advice would you want to give to somebody who really wants to use technology in a way that brings about change in the society, but is not really sure how to go about it?
Yeah, I love that question, because it makes me so hopeful whenever people ask that, like, how can I get involved? There are so many talented technologists and designers who want to make a difference, right? But they just don't know where to begin. So my advice is start small, start local, and start with humility. Civic tech isn't about fancy tools or big platforms. It's about addressing real needs that affect real people. So you don't have to quit your job or start a nonprofit. You can volunteer with a community group, such as Code for Pakistan. We have civic innovation labs that are volunteer community groups all over the country. You can partner with a local government. Um, you can mentor those working on public needs, for example, our women interns or our fellows. Or you could contribute just simply from the comfort of your own home to open source public interest projects, which are just available publicly on GitHub. You can find something that you're interested in. If you're a technologist, you can work on that. Or if you're a designer or researcher, you can reach out to the person that created that and say, hey, can I help? I have these ideas, and so on. So I think that the most impactful work just often begins with a simple question like, how can these services work better for my community? Right? Or how can I make this service easier? Or our service doesn't exist. Like, this is just there's a big gap here. Like, how do I make this better for my community? And so when I started Code for Pakistan, we didn't have funding or institutional backing, nothing. It was just me as a volunteer and a handful of other volunteers who cared deeply about community empowerment and improving how government serves people. And 12 years later now, that small experiment has reached millions of people. But it all started with, this empathy, this curiosity, and a willingness to collaborate across silos. And that would be my second piece of advice, which is collaboration over heroism, right? It's not about like, oh, I have to do this big thing for my community or make this big impact. It's really not about being the lone change maker. It's about working with government, not against it, about working with citizens, not for them. It's about working with other civil society organizations and helping change makers whose work you like, the most meaningful progress happens when technologists and policymakers and citizens like learn to speak each other's language. And then finally, I would say that remember that progress in public service moves slowly, but it does move. And there's a saying that, nothing worth doing was ever quick and easy or fast or whatever, and I'm totally rephrasing it. But if you stay patient and grounded and people-centered, you'll find that the impact you create in civic tech lasts and impacts many more people and lasts far longer than any product release cycle, right? So start small, stay humble, keep your compass set on empathy and collaboration. And the world of public innovation needs you no matter what your skill set is. You don't have to be a technologist to improve your community. I love this quote from Jane Jacobs, who often says that cities work for everybody only because and only when they are created by everybody. And that means all of us, every single person that's listening to this or not listening to it even, right? Like everybody needs to be a part of that.
That's great advice, and you kind of laid the ground for my next and last question, which was that social change takes time, right? These kinds of transformations that don't happen overnight, and you have to be really patient. So, as someone who's been doing it for a long time, how do you stay connected to your purpose? How do you overcome frustration that you probably feel at times when that process is too slow or you encounter challenges? And how do you avoid burnout while you continue to push for change?
Yeah, that's a really important question because working in systems that move slowly, especially government or social impact spaces, because you're in it for the long haul, right? It's very easy to just donate something philanthropically, and that's very helpful. But it's usually a band-aid on a problem. If you're really in it to change systems, one, it's deeply meaningful, right? It can be both deeply meaningful and deeply exhausting, right? And so for me, I think the key has been to stay connected to why I started this work in the first place. So as a child, I grew up in Pakistan, very aware of the inequities and inefficiencies of public systems. So, for example, I would take the U and U4 minibus frequently for transportation, sitting atop the boiling, engine in the very front of the bus. I don't know if you've seen those, but or later being sent to stand in line at the post office because the ladies' line was shorter than the men's line. Those sorts of things. But I also grew up very aware of the incredible resilience of people in Pakistan and the incredible resilience of the people who keep those systems going. Like, imagine if even those things didn't exist, right? Like the bus system and this and that. And so that memory grounds me. Whenever change feels impossibly slow, I remind myself that even small shifts in these systems can affect millions of lives. So especially for those who have the least, right? Those who have to take off an entire day's worth of work and wages and change two buses to get to the nearest government office in town or in the neighboring town. and only to stand and wait in line and be told that their turn didn't come because they don't have contacts and connections, and be turned away despondent. I mean, for those people, there isn't anybody speaking up other than government. Like they literally, they rely on government systems, on public systems. That's very existential, right? And so it's their lifeline. And at Code for Pakistan, what also helps is that we have a strong vision for what end success looks like, which may or may not happen in my lifetime. But, you know, as long as we're making progress towards it, because I think the other piece of it is that the purpose alone isn't enough, right? You have to enjoy the journey as well. Our team likes to laugh a lot at Code for Pakistan, which I so appreciate. We've also learned to celebrate like micro wins. That's the thing you can actually see, rather than the huge changes, you know, that are depicted by the end vision. So the micro wins are, you know, a government user who is constantly putting in data into our public platform, or a community member who finally feels heard, right? Or a civil society organization that reaches out for collaboration because they've heard we do work, you know, that is good. And like this, for example, you and HerDomain reaching out, and you yourselves do such great work that, you know, it's very heartening, that there's that collaboration. Or a government partner who starts championing human-centered design, or like a young professional who, after finishing our internship or fellowship program, and goes on to join government. And then we know, oh, now they have a certain way of thinking that they've been exposed to, and now they can do good things on the inside. So those moments might not make headlines, but they refill the energy tank. And I also lean on community, so colleagues and family, and we're a part of the Code for All network, which is an international network of civic technology organizations that are trying to make change in their own countries. And those are peers who understand the emotional labor of this work, and the fact that this work can be lonely unless you have like a network like that. So having honest conversations, I think that helps keep me human. And like having to zoom out every day, I think that's really critical, and keep an eye on the bigger picture. Like every little thing doesn't have to matter, right? So, which is something I had to learn as a thankfully mostly recovered perfectionist. But I think sometimes we can make small things, you know, mean so much. But I think once we hold on to this kind of curiosity and joy, and see design as an act of improving things, and it's an act of care, and it is fundamentally about being optimistic, right? At its core, this work is about believing that things can be better. So any small positive thing we do, and I would often tell the designers, you know, or other people at the Census Bureau, like any small positive thing we do is one more that didn't exist before, right? And is therefore making things better. So yes, transformation takes time and effort, but if you anchor yourself in purpose and community and curiosity and compassion and good humor, like, you know, you can sustain both the impact and yourself.
That's really great piece of advice for anybody who's working in civic tech, or just generally can be applied to whatever that they're working on, getting slow results, feeling drained, feeling frustrated. I think you're doing amazing work with Code for Pakistan. I wish you all the best for all your future plans for Code for Pakistan as well as personally. And thanks so much for taking the time to speak to me today. It was enlightening for me, and I learned so much, and so will our audience when they see this session.
Thank you so much, Aleena, for having me. And likewise, I would say I'm just so proud of you and HerDomain for doing good work, right? It really takes a village. There's just so much good work that needs to happen. So congratulations on all the good work that you are doing as well. And thank you for having me.